professor at the University of Surrey in the UK and leads the video codec group. He has been working in video coding and communications since 1998 and has published more than 250 international referee, journal, and proceeding papers in this area. Furthermore, he has published more than 130 international referee, journal, and conference papers in multimedia communications. He has contributed to several international projects and currently is leading 3D video communications work in 2 large-scale projects funded by the European Union on Media Communications. Recently, he won the IEEE Chester Saul Award, sponsored by the IEEE Communications Society, for one of his work on 3D video compression. Most recent tutorials during the last 4 years are the ICME 2012, 2011, 2010, 2009, 2008, 2007, ICASP 2009, and ICIP 2007. And as you might imagine, that's a lot of miles of flying around, waiting in airports, and drinking marginal coffee and tea at IEEE conferences. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Fernando. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. Today I'm here to present a tutorial based on end-to-end 3D video transmission business network. And as you can imagine, so this is a very long topic because you have to consider from capturing to the display of 3D video chain. But I will try to utilize the file available to utilize different aspects of the end-to-end system. I'll be mainly focusing about the quality evaluation side because that is something quite new, and also I was requested to consider this part of the story compared to the other aspects of the 3D video chain in general. So I'm coming from IDLab Multimedia Communication Research Group in Center for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing in University of Surrey, UK. And a brief introduction to the lab here. It's a 40 research group people working in many aspects of multimedia communication, so mainly in video communication. And we are one of the key players in European Commission funded project in FP7 and the new project team on Horizon 2020. And the latest project we started is the last week actually on Action TV, which is a 5 million funded research project on the future of the social TV with meaningful interactions. Will be the new dimension of the new broadcasting in 2 years' time. So these are the current activities I'm involved with: video coding, audio coding, mainly the quality of experience of media communication, the cloud communication, intelligent networking, and multimedia and video. So the overview for the today's talk is I'll be mainly concentrating, as I mentioned before, the item number 4, the video quality assessment and 3D video quality assessment techniques. And apart from that, I'll be also briefly touching the introduction to video, capturing and coding, and also the transmission aspect in different networks. So as you know, the 3D video has been evolved during the last few years, and many products are available at the moment, especially when it comes to displaying and the content production, the compression, and all these have been evolved quite significantly during the last few years. And if you just consider the end-to-end 3D video chain, so we have 7 layers of end-to-end layers within the end-to-end system. The capturing, 3D video capturing can be done like using the stereoscopic capturing, multi-view capturing, or conventional 2D capture, and then convert it to 3D. And different aspects of capturing can be done depending on the application we consider. And then we have the 3D the content either in the left and right view combination, or multi-view combination, or 2D to 3D conversion, and vice versa, and so on. And based on that, we will have to process the video or post-production the video to suit the transmission. And this can be done like removing some of the unwanted components from the video, and that will help to improve the compression as well as to improve the transmission properties. And after that, the video will be considered for the transmission. And in transmission, we have 4 different transmission mediums: satellite, the terrestrial, wireline communication, and the wireless WiMAX or UTE infrastructure. And then at the receiving side, we have to synthesize the content to reproduce the content according to the display. So we can have the stereoscopic display, stereoscopic displays or conventional displays, and then we have the end users. And as you know, the stereoscopic is the basic concept of 3D video at the moment. So left and right views are fused in the human brain, the visual cortex of the brain, to perceive the depth of the scene. So we artificially generate somehow the 3D perception using the left and right views. So this is a very simple representation, cost effective, as well as it is easy to adapt for existing audio-visual communication technologies. So this is how we capture the content. We have the object, and then we use the left and right camera to capture the content for the left view and the right view. So there are some advantages and disadvantages of this technique. And also on top of that, we have some other techniques like color plus depth 3D representation. We represent the color image together with the depth image, which is measured the distance between the camera and the pixels in the object. And also on top of this, we also have the color and the disparity representation, and there are a few other representations as well. So this is one of the representations I have considered, color plus depth. So using the color plus depth, we can regenerate or synthesize the left view and the right view. So there are a lot of applications you can imagine in 3D video. So I'm not going to discuss all these motivations we have the 3D video because it's quite common now. And I just want to briefly discuss about the quality evaluation of these techniques at the beginning. I have a lot of slides at the end, towards the end, to evaluate the video quality in 3D video transmission. So we have, if you have, for example, color plus depth video, so then we encode the video and then transmit the content in different transmission networks. And at the receiving side, we have the source decoder, and then we reconstruct the original color video and the depth video, and using a rendering algorithm we call depth image based rendering algorithm, we regenerate the content for the 3D display. So how we do the quality analysis using any objective models available. So we have the original and color and the depth image, and then the reconstructed color and depth image, and then we synthesize these original and the reconstructed data, and then we generate the original left and right and the reconstructed left and right, and then if you use PSNR, for example, using this objective quality metric, so we can calculate the quality for the left view and the right view, and based on your preference, you can either select the average or the weighted average between the left and right. So I'll be coming to this quality evaluation towards the end, as I mentioned before. So if we just briefly discuss about the media capturing, 3D media capturing. So I mean there are several ways of capturing the media content. So here I have selected 2 different methods of capturing the 3D content. So either you can capture the 3D content using 2 cameras or array of cameras, like I have shown here. And together with, we also need to capture the 3D audio. In this example, I have considered different mics for different objects, sound objects. I mean, there are several other ways of capturing the audio as well. And during the capturing, we have to consider several multiple video capturing workflow techniques. So some of the techniques are like the rectification, color correction, and depth extraction, and also the post-processing, depth post-processing for compression to improve the compression. So I'm not going to discuss all these in detail. And one example is like, for example, here now this depth captured for this particular man on the right hand side. So you can see the left hand side, the object is quite noisy. It's very difficult to compress as it is. But if you can improve this using a kind of adaptive median filter, and also on top of that, if you use a Gaussian filter, so you can further refine this object, and then you can have a clear kind of a depth image for this object. So this is something that we are doing under post-processing in 3D video capturing. So this particular technique that we considered in this project called Muscade, we just recently finished this again one of the European project on 3D video coding and transmission. What we did here was like we had 4 cameras, the baseline camera which is apart about 3 to 7 centimeters, and also on top of that we have 2 additional cameras on left and right. We call them the satellite cameras, and that satellite cameras can be changed. The distance between the satellite cameras can be changed between like from 7 centimeters to 60 centimeters. So based on that, we can change we can make use of these images captured using these satellite cameras to improve the rendering algorithms at the receiver to generate more views depending on the display we use in the project. So what we did was like using these 4 cameras, we capture 4 color views and the depth views or disparity maps, and together on top of that we also capture the audio content for 4 different using 4 different microphone arrays co-located with the cameras. So then we get the 4 different color plus depth or color plus disparity, and then corresponding sound information. So on top of this, we have to send some of the metadata information to regenerate or reprocess this data at the receiving side. And these are some of the parameters we considered to include in metadata format. So on the right hand side you can see that we have the color image and the disparity or the depth image, and then the sound information or audio information and the corresponding metadata for each and every views. So basically we have 4 streams available here for the transmission, 4 video streams per view, 1 per view, and the depth map stream 1 per view, and the audio stream and the metadata stream. So now what will be the bandwidth for this scenario? Like we have 4 different views, and if we consider a single high definition 180p25 format for the capturing and the transmission, and bandwidth requirement for per one channel is 8 megabits per second, and we have 4 depth maps. And if you consider simulcast 4 views, so we need 48, where plus 8 plus 4 is 12, 12 times 4 is 48 megabits per second, which is quite large compared to the single HD input. And if you consider NVD4, that is 2 satellite views and the base views, plus the corresponding depth information, we need 43 megabits per second if we use the MVC codec to compress the data. And if you use NVD2, it's 19 megabits per second. And if you just consider the stereo without the depth, it's like 13 megabits per second. So this is just to give you some idea about the bitrate calculation needed for this kind of a transmission. This is for the IP network, so it's almost same as the other one, but the previous one we considered the satellite and the terrestrial. So this can be these bandwidths can be accommodated. For example, in DVB-T2, if we have like 45 megabits per second, so with the NVD4 can be accommodated without any problem in DVB-T2. So at the receiving end, so we have also in this project we have provided some of the interactive features on top of the 3D video content. So there's an option, we also developed the 3D player in this project which can play back the 3D video together with the 3D spatial audio, and on top of that we also provided some interaction facilities to the users to enhance their quality of experience. So based on the system we have, like we can have different displays and different audio rendering devices available at the receiving end. Based on that we can reproduce the audio and the video. So these are some of the techniques we use for the sound capturing, which again I am not going to discuss in detail. So that is about the capturing of 3D audio and video. And once they are captured, the next one is the coding. So I think when it comes to the coding, so the most critical part is the video part. The audio coding is kind of now completely kind of matured now. We don't need much of the data rate for the audio coding. But for video, data is quite massive compared to the audio, but therefore, as you can imagine, 3D video coding is very important topic in 3D video communication. So these are some of the basic highlights of the video coding. I don't think we need to discuss all this in detail. So the video needs very high data rate in 3D, like I mentioned before. We are talking about 45 megabits per second data rate for MPD4. So still that is with compression, but without the compression it could have gone hundreds of megabits per second. So this is just to give you an idea about the effect of the compression. This uncompressed, this is the format quite popular sequence, format sequence. It's a uncompressed data rate is like 4 megabits per second, and this is the compressed data stream with the HEVC codec. You can see we can reduce the bit rate to 100 kilobits per second quite easily. So what we do in video compression is we try to capture the redundancies, spatial redundancies, temporal redundancies, and the properties of the human visual system to design the video codecs. So based on these concepts, the video codecs have been evolved quite significantly from MPEG 1, MPEG 2, and so on. Now we are talking about the HEVC at the moment. So the compression has been advanced quite significantly during the last few years. But the problem here is now the video coding people have not paid much attention to the transmission aspects of the channels. So some channels are quite error prone, it's quite sensitive to the errors, especially the wireless channels. So if there is any errors incurred during the transmission, that error can propagate because of the predictive nature of the video codec. So that will have detrimental effects to the end user experience. So in video compression, as you know, again intra-frame, two types of frames have been defined, intra-frames and interframes. So intra-frames are coded within the frame by considering the spatial the redundancies within the frame. In interframes we consider the relationship between the adjacent frames. The temporal redundancies are exploited in interframes, and this is the place where we have problems in the transmission. So if there is any problem, any bit or a packet is missing during the transmission, that can propagate if you are using the interframe techniques. And you can see that here is a typical video encoder. The motion estimation and the compensation is done for the interframe. So if there is any problem in the motion estimation, so motion vector receiving at the receiving end, or any other missing information at the receiving end will have detrimental effects because of the predictive nature of the coding. So these are some of the basics of video coding, which I am not going to discuss because everybody knows what is happening in video coding. So this is the performance comparison of the video codecs. Now we are in HEVC. So you can see that the video coding has been evolved quite significantly over the years. With HEVC you can get 40 to 50% coding gain compared to its coding standard is H.264. So the challenges in video transmission. So what are the challenges? The errors due to the fluctuation in the channel. As I mentioned before, some channels are quite sensitive to the errors, like the virus channels. So the whole packet or a bit errors can cause a significant problems to the video receiving and the receiving end, which will have a bad user experience at the receiving end. So errors create artifacts in the reconstructed video, and that can propagate both in the spatial and the temporal domain due to the hierarchical nature of the prediction. So how to solve this problem? There are two techniques you can use here: the error resilience and the error concealment. So error resilience is it should be done at the encoder side. So we have to support somehow using extra information. There are several ways of doing this. One possible way is to provide some extra information at the encoder side. In the case of some errors happen during the transmission, and this extra information can be used at the decoding side to regenerate the original content. And the other possibility is try to reduce the amount of dependency between the adjacent frames to reduce error propagation. One of the problem here is, like, if you try to reduce the amount of dependencies between the adjacent frames in the video codec, then that will have some negative impact on the compression ratio, which will have some impact on the consumption of the bandwidth, and so hence the cost of the transmission will be increased. So these are some of the techniques or the parameters we have to consider when we design the error resilience tools for a given application. So like I mentioned before, what are the problems of utilization error resilient tools in the transmission networks? They are mainly restricted by the channel bandwidth. Bandwidth is the cost at the end of the day, and the other aspect is the complexity of the codec. The complexity of the codec will be increased significantly if you try to use the error resilience tools at the encoder side. And that will have also some negative impact on the video codecs like HEVC, which is still struggling on real-time operation of the codec. So, like I mentioned before, the compression efficiency will also be sacrificed in the event of introducing the error resilience tools as encoder. And also, the other problem is that we are restricting the use of error resilient techniques in some possible application scenarios. So those are some of the problems with the error resilient tools. So then one has to balance between the error resilient tools that we use and the quality of the reconstructed video sequence for different applications. So what are the options available for new error resilience tools? One possibility is to improve the existing methods and work on them to improve further the performance of these techniques, or introduce new techniques that are compatible with the existing video coding standard. Once the video coding standard is updated, so we have to revisit these error resilience tools to synchronize with the new video coding standard, and hence we have to do quite a lot of work with the new video standard coming up in the market. But the other possibility is this: the most robust technique is to invent a novel video coding architecture which have a good resistance to the channel errors. So this is something many people have not tried that yet. This is actually the future of this video communication, in my belief, because that will guarantee a better quality of experience at the receiving end by considering the user perception, the network properties, and the transmission properties, and bring these all features to the video coding tools, the video coding technique that we can use or design to minimize these errors and hence maximizing the quality of experience, as well as we can compromise then the quality, the cost, and the user experience. So if we can design something like this, so that will be quite significant in video communication. So in error resilient tools, one can consider the localization techniques. I mean, depending on the region of interest, so you can say, okay, I'm interested about the middle of the picture, so I'm not worried too much about the other areas of the image. So therefore, one can consider the localized techniques for the error resilience tools. And data partition techniques like in the H.264, the previous video coding standard, they have used the three different partitions depending on the imports of the data, and then use data partition approach as an error resilience tools embedded in the H.264. And redundant coding techniques, and that also, as I mentioned before, will increase the bitrate burden, hence the cost will be increased. And the last one is the concealment driven coding technique. So that is again something which has not been paid much attention. Concealment driven coding technique is error concealment is done at the decoder. So if you can prototype the decoder at the encoder side somehow, I mean, use these reverse engineering concepts to redesign the error resilient tool. So again, this is something I believe that provide a better solution for in video communication. And apart from that, also people can consider the forward error correction techniques such as Reed-Solomon codes, turbo codes, and LDPC codes to protect the data as in other data communication. So that's briefly about the error concealment and error resilience tools that can be used in video communication. So here I'm going to consider very briefly about the channel aspects of video coding, video communication. I considered satellite, DVB, and wireline and the wireless channels very briefly. And on the right hand side, you can see that there are 5 different display techniques have been used, and we have done quite extensive testing for different networks in this project, particularly the behavior of this 3D video content, how they are performed in different networks, and to maximize the quality of experience. And this is how we encapsulated the data, stereo views, and the depth information are compressed using the MVC codec, and then they are encapsulated using the MPEG-2 transport stream encapsulation, and then depending on the network, we have MPEG-2 TS or TS for UDP and RTP streaming for the internet broadcasting. So in satellite networks, for the experiments, we have used the Ku-band broadcast system in Astra satellite, and the details are given here. We consider the AI interface of 27.5 megabits per second, one carrier per channel, and we consider the variable coding and modulation techniques. And here we have 3 different layers, stereoscopic, left and right, and MVD2, delta MVD2 we define because delta is standard for the depth or the disparity, and corresponding depth and disparity information is transmitted in MVD2, delta MVD2. In delta MVD4 we consider the satellite views as well as the corresponding disparity or the depth views. So these are transmitted using VCM. As you can see here, like they have different carrier to noise ratio because the most robust signal is the stereo, the baseline, and the other auxiliary streams are transmitted using different carrier to noise ratio and different modulation and encoding schemes. And here is a comparison between the VCM and the constant modulation, and you can see that the constant VCM has about 20% gain compared to CCM in different in satellite network 3D video transmission. So this, based on that experiment, so we can come to some conclusions here. And this is the result that we obtained from the satellite test bed. With 3D video transmission, as I mentioned before, we have 3 layers: stereo layer and the delta MVD2 layer and delta MVD4 layer. So based on this carrier to noise ratio, you can see that the user can decode the MVD4, MVD2 or the stereo video. So this is about satellite test bed we created. And in DVB-T2, So we have considered DVB-T and DVB-T2 with different guard intervals and different FFT sizes for the overview transmission. So we can see that the bitrate needed for the DVB-T2 for the MBD4 transmission is that means 2 satellite views and the corresponding depth image plus the baseline and their corresponding disparate information. We need 45 megabits per second. Then we can only accommodate one MBD4 channel. If you consider MBD2, so within that bitrate we can support 2 channels, and if you just consider the stereo transmission, we can support 3 channels in DVB-T2. So based on that, we also don't have some experiments in Italy. So these are some of the results we got using stream layer transmission, using multiple physical layer transmission. In stream 1 we considered the stereo transmission, and stream 2 we have considered the auxiliary content, that is MBD2 and MBD4. And based on the results, we can see that in some of the areas which is close to the transmission side, that is the red area indicated here, so that this area can receive both MBD2 and MBD4. If you are going further away from the transmitter, they can only receive the basic information, which is the stereo image, the stereo video. So this is something we created for the test bed for the DVB-T2. And for wireline transmission, the bandwidth is not that of a big problem, because the bandwidth is available, but it's not guaranteed. That's another problem. So therefore, the experiments for the wireline transmission is not that important. It was not that important for the project, so therefore I'm not going to consider this one here. But this is again one can consider for the wireline transmission. We can consider 4 different bit streams. Multicasting, the stream 1, stream 2, which is left and right video, and multicast 3 is the MBD2, delta MBD2, and delta MBD4 for the multicast stream 4. And same situation for the WiMAX and wireless LAN, because of the high data rate is needed, so we came to a conclusion that this data rate cannot be accommodated in WiMAX or wireless LAN for a good quality of experience at the receiving end, because we are talking about a very high data rate here. That data rate cannot be accommodated in this wireless LAN and WiMAX systems. So coming back to the video quality assessment, so this is something we considered in this project, especially by that time we started this project about 4 years ago in 2010. By that time we didn't have any quality of any metric to evaluate the 3D video quality objectively. And in the project we tried to address this problem and to come up with some solutions to measure the 3D video quality. And here I'm going to present some of the basic results we obtained. And based on that, we also evaluated the quality of experience for the 3D media experience. So why we need the quality assessment techniques is because of these reasons: for signal processing applications, the compression, the communication, and the display manufacturers, and also for the service providers to guarantee the quality of the content at the receiving end. So this is some of the high-level information why we need this kind of quality evaluation methods, especially the QoE models needed to optimize the content capturing, application, networking, or the transmission, and then the end-user experience. So if we can have an objective model for a good quality of experience model, and that model can be used to manage the system, like the content preparation, the applications, and the networking. So based on that, if we assume that the QoE model is available, so then one can consider the quality of service, quality of experience, and then another new parameter we introduced in the project again, the quality of business in media communication. So one can consider this 3Q model and then how to optimize this for better revenue for the service provider as well as a better quality of experience for the end users. So how to measure the video quality? As you know, that there are several ways of measuring the video quality at the moment using objective matrices like the PSNR and the SSIM and the VQM, and those techniques are considered as objective matrices. But how can we use this metrics for 3D video? Okay, that's a question. One can consider this metrics for 3D video quality assessment, but the problem is we may not get higher correlated results with these existing matrices. So that was the problem we tried to solve using, in the project. So the ultimate objective was to get a higher correlated results, set of results, objective matrices with the subjective test. So the advantage of subjective test is, okay, human being is the one who is determining the quality of the multimedia content, so that is the upper bound one can consider. But the problem here is it's time consuming, difficult to design, and cannot be performed in real-time applications. On the other hand, the objective matrices are fast and cheap, but it is difficult to design with a very high correlation with the end user perception. So that is the main problem we had to solve. And only few implementation of visual quality matrices are publicly available at the moment, and these matrices may not be ideal for 3D video quality measurements. So if you classify the quality matrices available at the moment, they can be broadly classified into three different areas, or three different classes: the full reference matrices, reduced reference matrices, and the no reference matrices. So if I briefly discuss about these three techniques, these three classes, the full reference matrix, what they use is they need the access to the input or the reference signal as well as the processed signal in the receiver. So what we do is we have the image or video processing algorithms or tools in between the input signal and the output signal. So once we process the data, so we use that processed signal and then compare this against the original signal, and then we come to a conclusion. Okay, so this is the quality. Like if you use the PSNR, so that needs the input and the output signal. So in the the reduced reference method, instead of using the input reference signal, we extract some of the features from the input signal, and we extract the same set of features from the processed signal, and then try to make use of these extracted features from the input signal and the output signal, and then based on that we come to a conclusion about the quality of the reconstructed frame. In the no-reference metric, we do not have any access to the input reference signal at all. So we try to regenerate some of the features from the processed signal, and then try to use these features to predict a quality value for the processed signal. So this is a high-level information for all these three classes. In no-reference method, you can see that we somehow create distortion measurements at the receiving end to extract some of the important features like blockiness and blurriness, and all these features can be used to model somehow the quality prediction for the processed video signal. In the no-reference, reduced reference, of course, we have to create the feature extraction from the processed signal and compare this against the feature extracted from the reference signal, which was transmitted along with the video content. So in most of the full reference quality assessment, they use an error signal, which is normally we use the MSE or the mean squared error signal. And based on the MSE technique, we assume that the degradation in the process signal is directly proportional to the error signal, which is in this case I consider the mean squared error. One can consider any other error signal measurement techniques. The problem here is the sensitivity of the human visual system to the errors may be different for different types of errors. And digital pixel values on which the MSC is typically computed may not be exactly represent the light stimulus entering into the eye. So that is one of the main problems with the MSC techniques. And also two distorted image signals with the same amount of energy error may have different types of errors, so which I will show you later on. So those are the problems with MSC based techniques. So PSNR is of course an MSC based technique. We compare the errors between the received and the transmitted signal, and then mean square is calculated, and based on that a PSNR metric is defined. So this is some evidence why we can't use the MSC techniques. So you can see that in image B, C and D, and all these three images have the same MSC of 225, but you can see that the perception of B, C and D are quite different to each other. And if you consider this one, this is much more prominent here, like B, C, D again have the same MSC, but you can see the image quality is quite bad. I mean B is much better than C and D, but B, C and D all have the same MSC of 225. So that gives you some answers why we can't use MSC based technique in the video quality assessment. One important aspect of the human visual system is the human visual system is quite sensitive to the structural information of the image. So if you can somehow create the structural information from in the image or perceive this structural information in the image, so that can lead to a better quality metric to use in video quality assessment. So SSIM is one of that, which considered this structural information. So in SSIM is they measure the similarity between the two images, and this structural distortion measure is somehow measured, and that will be considered in the metric they propose. So what they do is, so they consider three different distortion techniques: luminance change, the contrast change, and the structural change based on the statistical properties of the two images. So then we combine these three luminance, contrast and the structural distortions to define the SSIM metric. SSIM is mainly between 0 and 1. 0 is the best and 1 is the worst. So now this is a performance comparison of SSIM against the MSC based technique. You can see that MSC is quite same in all the images, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have different SSI values. The second one has the highest SSIM. That gives you an idea, like the second image is the best image out of the other 5, out of the other 4 images. So you can see a better correlation between the perceived image quality against the SSIM value. So there are some extensions to the SSIM work by different people. So I'm not going to consider this because of the time limitation. Apart from SSIM, EQM is the other main metric that has been proposed to replace the PSNR. So in the EQM, what they considered was like again as a reduced reference technique. So they extract some features from the original video and they try to reproduce the process with the process signal as well. So we have two sets of features, one from the original image and one from the processed image, and then they compare these features and then come up with a metric to evaluate the video quality. In fact, this is the state-of-the-art video quality measurement tool available at the moment for 2D video, and which outperforms the PSNR and the SSIM and some other metrics proposed with a higher correlation with the subjective test. But the disadvantage here is like we need and some an additional channel. We define this as ancillary channel, which is consumed about 10% of the original, 10% of the bandwidth of the original video, uncompressed video sequence. In the VQM, I'm again not going to discuss the full content of the VQM model, and they have considered 7 different parameters to model the metric, which I have listed here. And using these 7 parameters, they come up with a solution for the VQM metric. So here is some of the main comparison between the three objective models I considered here, PSNR, SSIM and VQM. And you can see that PSNR is the most simplest method, mathematically very simple, calculation is very small, but the poor correlation with the subjective results. And on the other hand, VQM is very complex and also needs quite a lot of computational power, but it has a very good correlation with the subjective results. SSI is sitting in between these two extreme ends, as you can see. So therefore, one can consider that VQM is a better way to measure the video quality in 2D images and video. Sorry. So then we come to the subjective measurements. So now the problem with this, one needs to consider, about 3-4 years ago, nobody knew that which metric can be used for 3D video quality measurement. So one of the things that we have done here is like we try to do the subjective experiments. So subjective experiments was also not defined by that time. So how to measure, how to perform the subjective experiments for 3D video quality assessment. So what we have done is, so we try to understand what was the best method of measuring the 3D video quality using the existing objective models available at that time. So for that we had to do a lot of subjective experiments. So mean opinion score is the one that is used in subjective experiments, and that has now been endorsed by and standardized by the ITU. So there are some particular guidelines for how to measure how to perform the subjective experiments for video. Like if we are using expert people as the subjects, so they have, for example, a minimum of 7 expert users should be used, and for non-experts they have to use at least 15 non-expert for a subjective test. And all this kind of information have now been standardized and can be used for any subjective experiments. So there are 5 different subjective evaluation techniques have been considered, and out of this DSCQS, so that is double stimulus continuous quality scale, is the most popularly used one for subjective experiments in 3D video quality assessment. And apart from that, one can also consider the single stimulus continuous quality evaluation, because as you know, the subjective experiments are very costly. It needs a lot of time, lot of money. For example, if you want to run the test for quite a number of sequences with different properties and for different lengths, if you consider different other artifacts and the factors like comfort and all the other things which you need to consider for a good quality of experience modeling, and therefore the double stimulus continuous quality scale cannot be used because it needs to be, it's very time consuming. So therefore one can consider single stimulus continuous quality scale can be used for such large experiments. So what we do is in double stimulus impairment scale, these videos are shown consecutively in pairs. First one is the reference, the second one is the impaired signal. So one of the problem here is the expert, then the experts are asked to give the opinion after the playback using the opinion scale of 5 to 1. The problem is here is the recency effect, that is the most recent clip has more effect on the decision. So that is one of the major disadvantage of double stimulus impairment scale. So therefore it's not popular within the 3D in video quality assessment techniques. And double stimulus continuous quality scale, videos are played in pairs, and both videos are shown simultaneously. Each pair is repeated a given number of times depending on the test. So one of the video is the reference and the other one is the distorted one. And the viewers or the subjects are not known with what is the reference and what is the impaired one. And this is the most commonly used method, especially when qualities are quite similar to each other. And this presentation structure of the material. So the standard has also, mentioned what is the minimum time of the video and what is the gap between two different video signals, and all these have been standardized. Here, for example, DS double stimulus continuous quality scale method. T1 is 10 seconds, that is the first video sequence, and then we should have at least 3 seconds gap between the two sequences. and then the second sequence, and so on. So this is the quality rating scale we use for subjective assessment. The left hand one is the double stimulus continuous quality scale method. We have A and B. A is the reference, A can be the reference, so B can be the impaired one, or vice versa. And then we have this for different video sequences. In single stimulus one, we only have one video signal, which is the impaired one, and the subjects will be asked to mark their voting based on their perception. And this is the other technique which I am not going to consider, because this is again something that is not popular within the community. So this highlights the basic features with different techniques, quality assessment techniques. Again, I am not going to consider or discuss all these. And these are some of the experiments that are just showing you up some ideas, the basic information how to measure the quality in 3D video. And here for this experiment we used autostereoscopic Philips autostereoscopic display with 28 non-expert volunteers and who aged between 20 and 40, and color vision was verified, eye acuity was tested. These things must be done for proper subjective experiment. And here we use the MED1, that is the stereo and their corresponding depth of the disparity maps. And double stimulus quality scale is used here, and based on the ITU-R VT500 standard. And in video quality assessment, one needs to use a logistic function. This logistic function tells you how is used to measure the correlation coefficient, and the disparate. We have to have the original image and the impaired image needs to be combined according to this logistic function. So this is a simple experiment. I just want to give you some feelings about how this is done. So in this experiment, for example, one can consider the impact of the color image and the depth image for the final the image quality in the 3D video. Now when the 3D video is experienced, so we need to, the subjects are asked to consider the image quality on the 3D video without considering the depth and the color. So in the behind the scene, what we have done is, so we have changed the quality of the depth map, and also we have changed the quality of the texture information. And now we can see that the depth information and the quality of the colored image. So the conclusion here is the image quality mostly depends on the quality of the video component of the MVD content, and it is not going to depend on the depth information. So this is just a simple experiment that one can consider, and based on the objective quality metrics available, PSNR, SSI and VQM, one can consider which one is reflecting the maximum correlation. Now here we have considered a few measurement techniques. In the measurement 1, we just calculate the left and the right PSNR or SSI and VQM, and then take the average. In the measure 2, we considered the weighted average based on the left dominant people and the right dominant people. In the measure 3, we considered the weighted average based on the eye acuity. And the measure 4, we considered the color image quality as the image of the image quality of the 3D video. We assume that it is equal to the objective quality of the colored image or the texture image. So if we consider the results here, we got, of course, VQM is the best. And out of the VQM, measurement 1, 2, 3, 4, measurement 4 is the best. So that clearly indicates that the 3D video quality is mainly determined by the quality of the color image, and it has nothing to do with the depth image. And if you repeat the same experiment for the depth perception, now you can see that the depth quality is also depending on the quality of the quantization parameter of the depth image. And if you do the same experiment here, that means the depth perception is going to depend on the quality of the color image as well as the quality of the depth image. So that means we need the human visual system is extracting the molecular degradation as well as the binocular degradation when it comes to the depth perception. And then what we can model this depth perception is a combination of the depth distortion as well as the image distortion in the color image. And alpha and beta are constant values, positive constant values, which are determined by the experimental methods. So then we performed, this is something quite significant in measuring the depth perception using the depth images. So as you can see, depth image doesn't have any natural features within the image. So that means it's very difficult. One cannot use the existing objective matrices like PSNR, SSIM or VQM to measure the video quality of the depth image. So that is something we faced quite significantly during this 3D video quality evaluation. What we have done is, so we have identified what are the main features which governs the quality of the depth image. So we understood that the relative distance between different depth planes, that is one of the significant factor, and also the consistency of the content in the depth plane. In a given depth plane, what is the structural the information? The change of the structural information, that will also have a significant impact on the depth quality evaluation. And the consistency of the content within the single depth plane is also contributing quite significant to the depth image. So once we identified these features, so then we model this using mathematical models, using the statistical features of the image and the depth image, and then we considered three different matrices, M1, M2, M3. And using the M1, M2, M3, this is how we evaluate now what is how many number of depth planes we have to consider. This can be extracted simply, for example, using the histogram of the image automatically. Once we extract the number of planes, and then we can just extract the other information. So I'm not going to discuss all these mathematics behind that. So once you calculate this M1, M2, and M3, then we can develop a metric to measure the depth perception using the depth image. And the human visual system, as I mentioned before, is quite sensitive to the depth image as well as the colored image. The molecular and the binocular information are extracted by the human brain to model the depth perception. So then you can see that the color image or the texture image is used to calculate the molecular information, and the depth image is used to measure the binocular information. So once you calculate this alpha and beta using the experimental numerical calculations, so then we found that alpha equal 1.5 and beta equal 1 gives you the best method, best fit curves for the depth perception for the range of video sequences we consider. So once you consider this depth model, so we evaluated again the correlation coefficients with the subjective experiments. You can see that it has a very high correlation coefficient like 0.87 compared to the best available method of using VQM. And once you calculate this content, now we have a metric to measure the depth perception, and also we know the 3D video, the image quality of the 3D video sequence. So then what are the weighting factors? Finding the weighting factors is also a very difficult task. So what we have done here is we had to consider a series of more algorithms to calculate these weighting factors. Again, I am not going to discuss the mathematics behind that. The basic idea was we could try to map what are the main features, temporal features we have to consider of measuring this information. So based on the metric, we calculated these values to the best fit curve for a range of video sequences we considered. From that you can see that finally the 3D video quality model was developed, and if we just use the average VQM, that was the best out of the three objective models we considered here, 0.80, and the proposed technique you can see that it is 0.95, so which is a significant improvement compared to the average VQM. And that metric was extended for the stereo video content measurements using different other displays. Like here, for example, we use the JVC display, autostereoscopic displays, and then based on that we calculated the weighting factors W for the left and right, and these are some of the results we obtained for different video sequences. And here what we have done is we try to model the quality of experience for the 3D audiovisual content. So one is to consider the video, the properties of the video as well as the audio and the context information. And based on all these three, then we have to consider the weighting factors. So what will be the ideal weighting factors to combine the 3D audio and the 3D video? And based on these weighting factors, one can consider a model for the 3D video quality of experience. So these are some of the KPIs, key performance indicators we consider. For audio, we consider the basic audio quality, front spatial fidelity and surround spatial fidelity, and the audio video correlation, and the image quality and the depth perception for the 3D visual experience. And on top of that, also we consider the comfort factor. For different displays, we have considered series of displays available in the market at the moment, orthosterioscopic, stereoscopic and hollow visual displays to determine the comfort factor. So I'm not going to discuss about the audio quality of experience modeling, which consider these features that I discussed before. So these are some of the detailed experiments we have conducted in audio quality measurements. And like I mentioned before, comfort is the one we considered, especially with the displays available in the market, together with the audio and video content. So something we have not considered in this modeling is the context information, but one needs to also consider the context information together with the other features. But we thought that the context information is not that significant when it comes to the final keyword modeling. Of course, it is going to be dependent to a certain extent, but we assume that the context information doesn't have a significant impact on the final keyword model. And based on that, we also did some experiments with 3D audio and video content. And what we used is we have used JVC for the video compression and AAC advanced audio coding algorithms for the audio compression. And here are some of the results for the few video sequences we considered for the project, the Dracula and the 24 trailer sequences. And what we have done is we have changed the quality of the audio and the video, and different Wing-Opinion scores have been obtained for these two different video sequences. And these two different video sequences have different features, like 24 trailer sequence is a kind of a very vibrant sequence which has a lot of motions and artifacts. It's a car racing sequence, and the Dracula sequence is a synthetic sequence which has quite, again, some of the features is the Dracula sequence is the audio, it's a whole horror sequence, and audio is quite important. We thought that audio is quite important, that's why we created that sequence. But at the end of the day, you can see that the video quality is determining the overall QoE, even though the audio is quite important. But the final results we got in the subjective experiment is the video is much more important than the audio signal. So both the conclusion is still valid for both sequences. The video plays a prominent role in 3D audio-visual quality of experience modeling. So that's the result that I want to discuss in 3D audio-video quality measurement techniques. Even though I have a lot of results, I don't have the time to discuss all this. In summary, what I wanted to say here is like the state-of-the-art video codecs have been matured quite significantly. The problem here is in video coding is they have not taken in, they have paid some attention, but the attention is not enough for the video communication problems down the line in the channels. These problems have not been fully considered in the video coding architectures so far. So the bandwidth and cost is the main problem. Eventually, in a few years' time, as you know, the video traffic is reaching almost to the 100% of the network in the networks. So if we do not have a proper mechanism to control these errors, and then there will be a huge burden on the network side, and eventually we are losing a lot of money and the energy and other resources for duplicating the information. And also we consider the different transmission networks, satellite, wireline and DVB and WiMAX for 3D video transmission. Some of the channels are not feasible for 3D video transmission, but for example, satellite and UV are the most prominent transmission mediums. And the quality assessment is still an ongoing process. The models we developed so far has been verified for the range of video sequences available, but quite extensive experimentation is needed for other video sequences which are quite spare at the moment. I mean, the most of the sequences available in the 3D video community is quite limited at the moment in time as well as in the country, within the content. So these algorithms need to be verified for a range of other video sequences as well, which will eventually come in few years' time. So that's all I want to discuss. I just want to acknowledge the project Muscade, which is used here mostly in my presentation. Thank you very much. So we have 5-10 minutes for the questions.
Do you have any questions from the audience? None? Okay. Then, for those who want to ask any more detailed info, you're welcome to come up and chat with the speaker. Otherwise, we'd like to thank you for your presentation.
Thanks for inviting me, especially I need to thank the general chair, Tom. He has invited me to come and have a talk here. I met him last year in a conference. So thanks, Tom, for inviting me to come and have a presentation here.
Thank you again, and our next event will occur during the lunch presentation. And Stu, do you have any comments you want to make about downloads?
Anybody who tried who wasn't able, get it?
Yeah.
Did not? You, raise your hand, you were not able?
Yeah, I did think, but I don't mind this presentation.
I have a jump drive if you came later on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.